right. Well, we are back, and this time I am here with somebody that I know pretty well.
Yeah, pretty much.
Here with Albert Antoine, and if anybody puts the last names together, they'll figure out some kind of family relationship there.
Yeah, we kind of look alike too, they say. I'm the good-looking one.
Definitely right. So tonight we were just gonna talk a little bit about how you were raised, your family background, and how you came into faith, obeying the gospel. Can you tell us a little bit about just like early life, your childhood, mom and dad, like what was the household
Sure.
like back then?
So basically, I mean, my family was such that my father, there were three siblings, myself, my sister, who was the oldest, and then a brother who was just like under her. But we also had, my mother had two sons from a previous marriage. And so they were older. They had different last names than us, but we were all in the same home. So we consider ourselves siblings, right? And so we were raised pretty much that way. And in early part of my life, it was pretty smooth, pretty easy. A mother, a father. Yeah, I didn't know much. I was just a little young kid. And so my earliest memory, oddly enough, was before I even went to school. I was laying under a church pew, believe it or not. And I know now it was a Pentecostal church service. But I was sleeping, and then I woke up, and I looked around, and there's these people up there singing, right? One has a tambourine, one has an accordion, one has a guitar. And I mean, I'm just a little kid. I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. And I just rolled over and went back to sleep, of course. And that's kind of like my earliest memory. My mother was very into encouraging me in school. She really, like my first several years of school, I never missed a day of school.
Wow.
Right. So she would constantly encourage me to do my best, to stay in attendance, et cetera, et cetera. And I did. I made, I got these certificates for being in school, every day for the whole year, never missing a day.
Perfect attendance.
And then perfect attendance. And I also made honor roll. And my mom was real proud of all that stuff. My dad, I don't know that he ever said a single word to me about anything to do with my schooling or my grades or anything. I mean, my dad was a very private kind of person. And he didn't really say a lot. I mean, he was okay, but he didn't really show a lot of attention, affection, or attention, none of that. But my mother she was very much that way. And so that's kind of what I remember. And some of the fun times as I was little, like maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, we would go fishing, sometimes as a family, sometimes because my other siblings were in school. My mother would take me and go with one of my aunts, and we would go fishing and stuff like that. And we'd stay out in the bayous because I'm in Louisiana at this point. That's where I was born.
You can explain what a bayou is for people who don't know what a bayou is?
Yes, it's basically a fancy word for a swamp.
So that's a swamp for all those Floridians.
Yeah. For if you're from Florida, it's just a swamp. And so, I mean, things were going pretty cool. I mean, I had a reputation. I was a joking kind of kid. Now you probably you probably have a tough time believing that. But
I don't believe any of this.
Yeah. But I would tell jokes as a little kid, and I'd kick back and kind of like look in the mirror so that I could see myself.
That was a good one.
I was a really happy-go-lucky little kid. I even had one of my great uncles who helped build our house out, because when I was born, it was a 3-room house.
Oh.
That's what they brought me home to. And so my uncle helped my father build some more rooms. And, I would just go around helping him and I would whistle. And he started calling me the Whistler, right? So I had that little nickname. But all of this kind of changed course when I was about 8 years old. My parents broke up. And it's a long story. It was not supposed to be a breakup, but it's really my father that kind of made some decisions that weren't really for the family, for our immediate family.
Mm.
It was other interests that he had. And so my mother moved out to California. My father stayed in Louisiana. And the deal was he was eventually going to join her there because he had lost his job. So my mother took her two boys, right? And they went to California, started setting up and getting things squared away and so forth. And we would come later. And we did. A few months later, my father, my sister, and my brother, 3 years older than me, she's 4.5 years older. And we went to California. And I'm just a young kid. And I remember the trip because it's so outstanding, right? And while we were there, I have an uncle that actually found my father a job. And so everything was going fine. And then his mother called. And his mother was kind of like the matriarch of the family. And we're, my background is American Indian and Cajun French. And there was a real cliquish sort of situation there in the family. And you're either in or you're out. And so my grandmother on my father's side told my father, hey, your job's open back up now, and da-da-da. And he's making a lot of money for that day and time.
Yeah.
Like probably 4 or 5 times the amount of money he was making in Louisiana.
Oh, my goodness.
But he decided he was going to go back. Again, they're a very tight-knit, cliquish kind of family. And he's one among, I think, 8 siblings, the oldest. So
wow.
all of that kind of played into it, I guess. And I begged my father, let's not leave because I wanted the family to stay together.
Yeah.
But he decided he was going to leave anyways. He quit that job. And the night before we were going to leave, or 2 nights before, my sister got in an automobile accident, really bad one. And she was hospitalized, so she couldn't leave with us. So it was just my father, my brother that's 3 years older, and myself, and we leave. And so I can remember like it was last week. I turned around, I was sitting in the passenger seat up front, and I bawled my eyes out. I don't know how long I cried, but I cried myself to sleep. And I'm about eight-ish. And again, I can remember that because of the trauma that it happened. So we went back to Louisiana, went to Living Life. And I don't know what was going on really between our mother and father in terms of conversations. But my mother wasn't coming back to Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I really don't blame her. As an adult, having grown up, up several years there, and the family situation and all that for her, I didn't blame her at all. But so my brother, who's 3 years older, myself. So at this point now, I'm bitter, right? Water will solve that problem. And so I start looking for community outside of the home. We had, like I said, a close-knit family among the Cajun types, but I started pulling away, and I started hanging in the streets. And my father, fortunate for me, worked graveyard. So that meant he went to sleep around 2, 3 in the afternoon, and then he slept until he had to get up and go to his shift. And so while he's sleeping, I'm in the streets. when he goes to work, I'm in the streets.
Mhm.
Not long before he gets home, I'm in the streets. And then I go home, right?
Yeah.
So I spent many nights like that. And you wonder how in the world I did it. I don't know how I did it because I'd get up and go to school next morning.
Wow.
So I'm out till 1, 2 in the morning. And I did this for literally the next uh, close to 10 years.
Wow.
And that's how I lived. Now, my brother, who was 3 years older than me, we didn't hang a lot together. I mean, he was 3 years older. So um, I had my own set of friends doing my own thing. And I started getting into a lot of trouble. Not, not that I was seeking trouble or trying to get into trouble,
Mm-hmm.
but just the places I was hanging. So something else that happened to me right around the time that my parents broke up, I started getting bullied in school. And, you know, at first I acquiesced. I brought maybe somebody a little bit of lunch money here and there, but it wasn't long until it started bothering my conscience.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't feel, I didn't feel good about myself.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I can't let this go on. Right. So, and there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of pressure and stuff. A little kid
Mm-hmm.
just lost my family. Now I'm dealing with this.
Yep.
And so I talked to a couple of folks and and I didn't want my brother to be involved because we lived in a very tough environment, right? I mean, it was like Thugsville.
Oh my.
And so I didn't want my brother to get involved because these people that I was dealing with had brothers too.
Right.
And so I did not want him to be involved. So I sought out some, and I'm probably 10, 11 years old.
Uh-huh.
I'm seeking out information. I'm at, hey man, how do you fight? Right? Because I hadn't been in fights. I had with my brothers, but it's a whole different ball game.
Oh yeah.
So they gave me some pointers and probably I'd say around the 5th grade, I started fighting back. And I was determined. Because once I'm determined, you know how it is. You're just determined.
Yeah.
I was not, even if they beat me up, I was not going to stay down.
Yeah.
And so I fought back. And eventually, what the bullies realized that, yeah, they may, quote, beat me up, right?
Uh-huh.
The crowd may say they beat me up, but they were taking chances
Right.
with their eyeballs, with their nose, with their mouth.
Right.
Because I was going for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably easier targets around the school.
Man, I was going at it for all I could.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you how many fist fights I had, but I had a lot.
Yeah.
And eventually they backed off. And then of course, I'm one of the crowd, right? I'm welcomed in then.
Right. Uh-huh.
But I didn't really bully people. I've never liked bullying. I hate it, probably because I was bullied.
Yeah.
And so my whole world was turned at that point. I'm hanging in the streets. Now I don't really mind. I didn't go seeking fist fights, but I bet you I didn't mind it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did, I mean, people talk about fighting fair, right? Quote unquote. There ain't no such thing in the streets.
Right.
There are no rules.
Yeah.
So
even Bruce Lee said that. He was like, in a real street fight, you use your teeth, you use your everything. Like
anything you get your hands on.
Yeah.
A board with a nail in is kind of ideal.
Yeah.
Or something that's sharp, anything.
Yeah.
And so, that's just how I was. And about, I don't know, I was in the 3rd grade when I started smoking. Right. I remember where I was. I was in the bathroom of the elementary school. That's where I got my first smoke.
Like totally cliche. Smoking in the boys' bathroom.
Honest to goodness truth.
That's crazy.
I started smoking cigarettes. And, it took me a while to get kind of comfortable with the smoke. But then, but everybody else was doing it. So, hey, I'm cool. So I started smoking. And then as I was hanging in the streets, I started drinking, right? Like at first, kind of like just hanging with friends and kind of begging people for, shots of wine and beer and then, graduating on up to whiskey and mixed drinks. And what we started drinking mostly was like Coke and this whiskey called, I don't even know if they make it now. Seagram 7 was the one who made the whiskey. And so, I was doing that.
Cajun country didn't have any good moonshine?
Um, well,
Or is that just a stereotype?
no, I didn't hang with them.
Oh, okay. So you didn't hang with the Cajun
I
crowd.
did not.
Oh, wow.
I think that I was kind of bitter by the fact of the treatment of my grandmother on my father's side,
Yeah.
because it's a long story again. But if you were a child of a son of hers, you were a redheaded stepchild. If you were a child of a daughter of hers, then you were,
Oh, wow.
wonderful. The sun rose and set in you.
Wow.
And that's just the way it was. Okay. And, but I didn't care. I bumped it off.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't have choice words for it either. I would just go and do my own thing, found my own community.
Yeah.
But it's a rough community, really. I mean, it's not that I looked for trouble, but because of the environment I was in, it brought trouble. It brought lots of trouble. And so eventually, I'm hanging out and I'm going to parties and dances, and believe it or not, I'm even hanging out at this one particular spot is where there were 2 taverns, saloons on either corner, right? And that's where I hung, like sometimes till the wee hours of the morning, sun comes up.
Wow.
And I'm heading back home before my dad gets home, right? I don't know what he would have said or done, but later on in life, he didn't say anything. But of course, maybe when I was 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, maybe he would have.
Yeah.
And, I think about these things. I look at my grandchildren, and, Selena's 8 years old. That's where I started smoking.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right? Lex is 11. I was drinking.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like you got Sydney at 12 and then Ella at 13. By now, man, I'm like drinking hard stuff. I'm gambling. Played poker a lot. I played craps a lot, right? 2 dice, 7-Eleven, go to heaven, and that whole thing. And I'm doing all this stuff. And this is that. And then by the time I was 16, which is Elena's age, I mean, I had already been picked up and locked up. But they could never, ever, I know God doesn't condone sin.
Yeah.
No doubt. But some way, somehow, I always got off. I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
I literally got off. At times, I was caught red-handed. And for whatever reason, I'd get off. I mean, this one time, I'll just tell you one example about this. Caught red-handed. Me and a couple of friends of mine were stealing this truck. And one of my friends, a dummy, he took the key and he tossed it, right? Because it wouldn't start. So he got angry and he tossed it. So we start walking off. Lo and behold, the owner comes back and he can't find the keys. And I guess somebody must have told him they saw us in the car, blah, blah, blah. And we tried to steal the vehicle and yakety yak.
Oh, man.
Cop comes, picks us up. And the guy says, look, we know you did it, right? So he has to drive 15 miles, a small town, 15 miles to get to the county courthouse, right? And on the way there, he's telling us, if you confess, I'll let you go. Well, of course, this is a cop, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to believe a cop. No way, dude. So I think I must be about 14 years old here. And he takes us to the county jail. He walks us in. He puts us in separate cells, okay? So you want an eerie feeling. You walk into this concrete slab place.
Right.
There's these bars behind you, and then there's this loud clang when they slam the door shut. It's like, whoa, there's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
But it didn't really move me, right? I was determined. I was not going to fess up. So my turn comes. They take me down, take me into interrogation. I sit there, and I look these guys right square in the eye. And I say, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do what you're saying. Well, so-and-so has. Well, I don't care. I didn't do what you're saying. Now, these are grown men.
Yeah.
And But they take me back. One of my friends actually buckled. He spilled the beans. Lo and behold, this guy takes us back home, drops us off at each of our individual homes. Now, my father's at work, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the life that I led. And I had some pretty serious crimes under my belt by the time I was 17 years old.
Wow.
And some of the things I would do is my dad would give me a $5 bill for school lunch. I would take that $5 bill and I would go play poker. I would go and I would play dice with grown men, and I would win a lot. And so I multiplied my $5. and with that money, of course, I smoked. By this time, I think I'm smoking. I don't know. First, I smoked Winston's. I don't even know if they make them anymore. And then after that, I smoked Cools with a K, because I was cool, right?
Yeah.
And I would drink cheap wine, right? I mean, real cheap dog stuff. and occasionally, I would get in a situation where I'd buy whiskey or harder drink, but most of the time it was beer and stuff like that. And then I started taking pills with the beer, uppers, downers, whatever. I wasn't picky. I'd just get whatever. And so that went on, and I did have some more serious criminal stuff happen to me. Well, I happened to it, actually, and got busted. One time, a witness who saw me do something that was really, really bad just bowed out at the last minute and wouldn't testify against me. And so all this stuff happens to me, and I'm thinking, man, I'm like, wow, somebody up there is, I literally said that. Somebody up there is looking out for me. I don't know if he was or wasn't, but man, it was sure going my way. So all of this, really started culminating, and I just, after a while, it just gets old, right? It's same old, going doing this. And at times I'm putting my life on the line, right? It's, it's kind of like, what in the world am I doing? But I didn't stop. I kept doing it over and over and over. And when I was younger, my parents had sent me to a Catholic church. Me and my siblings would go to Catholic church, and they enrolled us in catechism, and we went through all of that. So I got a lot of teaching about God. And I was taught prayers. And there were 3 prayers that I remembered. An Our Father, a Hail Mary, and the Apostles' Creed. And I would recite those prayers. And this is odd, but at night when I would come home, wee hours of the morning, before I went to bed, I would bow down and say those prayers.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Honest to goodness, I would bow on my knees. God is my witness. I would do the sign of the cross, because that was good Catholic. I would say those prayers, and then I would talk to God about life stuff. Do the sign of the cross, get into bed.
Wow.
Next day, I'm out. As the old saying goes, honky-tonkin' again.
Yeah.
I was out there. And so I did this, continuously. Gotten a lot of close calls. But it got old. After a while, you're kind of checking yourself out. You're thinking, what in the world am I doing? Where am I going? I had no aspirations to do anything. I wasn't planning on, if I graduated, and I did good in school. Again, this is another odd thing about my situation. Even though I was doing all this stuff, I made A/B honor roll every single time the report card situation came out.
Oh, wow.
Every time. They even put my name on something at my school. The high school was called the Hall of Fame, the the Honor Roll Hall of Fame. My name is on it.
Yeah.
But here I am. I got into trouble all the time in school. It wasn't every day, but But, I would get in trouble
Yeah.
because I had a mouth. And if I felt really sincerely um, indignant about something, I was going to stand up for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, give you an example. One time I had this high school teacher, and I never liked abusive authority. I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, it's like bullying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have this thing about bullying. And so this teacher, he was, he was like making fun of kind of a couple of, I mean, this is a teacher. He's making fun of a couple of kids in the class because they're not that quick and that swift, not that smart. And I made good grades. But, I went up to the guy and got into a conversation with him. And I mean, I was furious. I grabbed him by the neck of the neck. I threatened him. And so naturally, one of my trips to the principal's office, and I paid the price and got kicked out of school. But even in spite of all of that, and that wasn't the only time I got into a kind of a gang fight, if you will, on the school campus, and one time at a football field. And I mean, it's just, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time because I sought out the wrong place.
Yeah.
It's just how I lived. And I had no aspirations to do anything other than, hang, smoke, drink, cuss,
Mm-hmm.
party.
Yep.
And that was about it. That was my life. And then, I went to visit my mother when I was 17. No, I was 15. Went and visited my mother the first time. And, stayed there, but I didn't really like it. And I wanted to get back home because that's where the action was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a lot of action in my life. So I went to California, and lo and behold, while I was gone, the crowd that I hung with, and you can call them a gang. We didn't have a formal name for ourselves or anything like that, but they got into this fight with a group that had come from out of town at one of the bars that we typically hang at.
Mm-hmm.
And when the fight was over, my homeboys were walking home, right? And these guys were from out of town, so they were driving in a car. They drove their car into that crowd, killed one of the guys, and hospitaled a couple others.
Whoa.
I happened not to be there, right? I was gone, thankfully.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have been right in the middle of that. So again, I'm just trying to give you examples to show you the kind of life I was living. It was ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, I did all kinds of stuff. And if I felt like I wanted to do it, I did it. But, there were some things I wouldn't do. Some things I wouldn't touch. I mean, it's weird too. I think you used to make fun of me because I talked about driving a car real fast around a curve, right? And I had friends who did that, and they wound up in a tree, right? Because they were going to straighten out this curve, right? I thought that was the dumbest thing I ever heard of. And so I just never did anything like that.
Yeah.
But I did do a lot of crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when I went back to California, I went back home, found that all this had transpired. Went back to California a couple of years later. My brother was getting married, the one that was 3 years older than me, because by now he has moved to California. It's just my father and myself for several years. And so I go to California. I go to his wedding. Oddly enough, that's where I met now my wife. Of course, we said hello and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But she was in the church that he was in, that my mother was in. They were in the church, my mother, my brother. And it was a Pentecostal type church. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't go to church or anything. I went back home after the wedding and everything, and I was happy to get back home. I didn't really like that environment because it was, it wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
So, again, I get into a few more situations, trouble and whatever. And then one summer, it was after I graduated. And by the way, I graduated high school, having been kicked out of school a few times while I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I still got a couple of scholarships
Oh,
offers.
wow.
I mean, if you can believe that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I got a couple of, because of my grades.
Yeah.
And this is one funny thing to me that I always remember. When they call my name out for getting a scholarship, you can see the teachers over there turning and talking to one another. How in the world did that happen?
It's impossible. It can't be the same
This
guy.
guy get a scholarship, right? And I could see them out of the corner of my eye, and I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and now I'm like, I really am. On the surface, it looks like everything is okay, but underneath, it's really eating me up.
Yeah.
And so then I go to California. I go back to California, and that's where, you know, my mother is living there. She's in church because she was a backslidden Pentecostal, if you will, when I was a child. My father was another religion. It'll go unnamed because he probably isn't the best representation of that religion, that Christian religion. But, you know, so I go back, and, you know, I got two older brothers there. Actually, I have three older brothers, excuse me. My one brother was 3 years older. And then I have another brother who is the oldest, was 8 years older than me. And then the next one is like 6.5 years older than me. And so when I go there and I go to California, I start hanging with them because the one brother was in church, my sister's in church, my mother's in church. That was no bueno for me.
Yeah.
There was no way I was going to church. So we hang and you know, and I get deeper into drugs. And the drugs were the drugs of what I would say were my choice. They were, my friends were shooting up heroin. I was not going to stick no needle in my arm to get no heroin. The problem was, number one, the needle. The second problem was I knew that my brother, the second oldest boy, had been in and out of prison because he would get a heroin addiction. And I knew him personally. And I knew some of the stuff he was doing to get the money to buy the heroin. And I thought, there ain't no way in the world I'm going to let something control me like that. Right. Now, all the while, the world is controlling me. Worldliness is controlling me. But I wasn't going to let that get a hold of me because I saw what he did. The stuff he would do,
Yeah.
man, I mean, even as bad as I was, I wouldn't do that stuff.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't take heroin, but I did smoke marijuana and I did take LSD. The oldest brother of mine, he was what we called a speed freak. He would just constantly take speed. And, you know, you take that speed and it's like, man, you're like racing at 3,000 miles a second. And then after you come down, it's like you crash, right? And then he was crashed for 2 or 3 days.
Oh.
And so I didn't take speed either. So we would hang. And, of course, you know, my brother, the second oldest, was married. And the wife had a sister. And so she was about my age, maybe a year younger. So we started, quote, dating. And then I started working at this place that my mother, she had married someone now. And he owned old folks' home or whatever you want to call it. Sanatorium, whatever they call those things. And I started working there as a janitor. Right, mopping floors and whatever. And of course, I was still partying and doing whatever. And so there were times when I partied hard and then I got to go to work. So I would go to work, clock in, do a few things so people would see me, and then I'd slip off somewhere and sleep.
Oh, man. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my. I would just slip off and I would sleep. And one time I actually got caught, right? I'm sleeping. And so there's this real nosy lady that works there. and she's got it in for me. And my older brother was working there also. She got in for both of us. So she finds me in there, but when she finds me, I'm sleeping, right? So I pretend to be like out, right? Like something's wrong with me, out. And then they get people running in there, and a bunch of people started coming with wheelchairs and stuff, and they got this thing, they're putting the smelling sauce under my nose and that whole thing. And so I'm like, I mean, I played the role. I could have been an actor.
Hey, you're in California. It's the right place for
Yeah,
it.
exactly right. But I wasn't I wasn't in a position to tell them that this had happened. So anyways, I finally, one day I am, and God is dealing with me, right? He's convicting me. He's dealing with me. And so I decide, one night, my brother and I, this is October 31st, right? Halloween. We're going to take these girls out to the movies. We had been dating them. I'd been seeing them, this one girl, and not the sister of my sister-in-law, but somebody else. And so we're going to go to the movies, and my brother, he and I, neither one of us have a car. So we have to borrow my sister's car. So we borrow her car. We're going to go to a store and get some cash. Safeway was the store. And while he goes in to cash a check, I go to the phone booth to call. No pickup. They just, the line's busy, blah, blah, blah. We get back in the car and we're driving to my sister's house because we have to drop her off at church. Mm-hmm. So that we could have her car. Then, while we're on the drive from the store, I couldn't get the girls. I told him, hey, I couldn't get them. He said, well, that's all right. We'll just, call them when we get to Jenny's house, my sister. Mm-hmm. And so we're driving. And while I'm on that drive, now in the middle of all of this, out of nowhere, there's a strong conviction comes on me sitting in that car. I don't know why. I mean, I wasn't praying. I hadn't been to church. I just all of a sudden, there's a strong urge. And I know what it is, you see, because of my Catholic training and because my mother had been talking to me when I was little and all that. I knew what this was. And so I'm there, I'm going through this thing in my head. Oh my, do I, don't I? And on the one hand, there's this voice saying to me, come, and it was a soft voice, a gentle voice, a loving voice. I don't mean audible. Yeah. Right. But on the other shoulder, there's this, if you do that, you're going to have to stop doing this. You got to stop doing that. You got to stop doing this. You don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know how many minutes went by. The drive was only like a 15, 20-minute drive, but it seemed like forever. And I finally decided, you know what? I am going to go to church with my sister. I turned to my brother and I said that. I'm going to go to church with my sister. I said, I'm going to go to church. And man, he was like, what? And so it shocked him. So I did. And I guess pretty much I repented that night, had an amazing experience of repentance. God touched me in a way that I had never been before. I had never experienced this. Yeah. But everything like weight lifted off of me. And I was like, boom. And then, of course, I continued to pursue. A couple of weeks later, I got baptized. And then a week after that, I got filled with the Holy Ghost. Wow. And so, and been, ever since. So I kind of have a poem here I'd like to just quickly read. Yeah. And this is something that was, I did for when I was going for my master's, a business communications course. This guy wanted us to stand before the class, tell of an experience, a life-changing experience. So I thought, while I was sitting there, I thought, I'm going to write a poem. I got in my car. It was a 45-minute drive. On the way home, all of this came to me. Wow. Honestly, and I'm not an artistic guy at all. But this came to me, so I rushed home and wrote it down. It says, I have a story to tell, and it won't take me long. about my childhood and how everything went wrong. With my father working graveyard and my mother miles away, I took to the streets to experiment and play. At the young age of 8, I started to smoke. I thought it pretty cool once I conquered the choke. I developed the thirst by the time I was 10. Didn't matter to me, it could be whiskey, wine, or gin. By the time I was 12, I was having lots of fun. Violence became my ally. I was packing a gun. In just a few years, I had really turned mean. It could have something to do with the glue and gasoline. I sniffed the glue and gasoline. Wonder what that means. When I reached 16, I was very well known. If a crime was committed, the police were at my home. They knew I was involved or could point them the way, but procedures tied their hands. They couldn't make me say, man, I'm really something. Not much crime I hadn't done. Misdemeanors, a few felonies, and even a capital one. Just when I thought there's nothing more to see, along came marijuana and my good friend LSD. Now I'm 18 and doubting my whole life. Should I just end it all with a gun or a knife? When I first started out, I just wanted to play. Little did I know it would end up this way. Before I hit 19, this had all turned around. I had an experience that placed my feet on the ground. It wasn't death or any trouble that I could mention. None of these things could have gotten my attention. While riding in a car headed for a night on the town, my mind began racing and my heart started to pound. There was a voice in my head just as clear as a bell, asking if I was satisfied, or could I really tell? I glanced at my brother, wondering if he could see, but he was oblivious to what's happening to me. As my past shot before me, a small voice said, repent. I cannot explain it, but I knew what that meant. All of a sudden, I want to read God's word. Could this have something to do with the voice I just heard? I'm changing my plans and going to God's house. As I told my brother this, he got quiet as a mouse. I followed that voice in a very clear direction. My life is now changed by God's own perfection. Of my close running mates that I left behind, some are long dead and others are serving time. There's a lot I hadn't said in my little rhyme, but I must cut it short in the interest of time. For the things I've omitted, you can fill in the blanks. The most important message, my reason to give thanks. And so I do believe God gave me that as I was driving home from school. Because like I said, I'm not an artistic guy. So it's got to be God when stuff like that happened. And all of this just kind of came to me. I ran home, wrote it out.
Wow. That's great. 45 minutes, just boom, just hits you.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
So God is good.
Yeah.
He's great.
And what would you, so somebody in a similar situation, I mean, your background and upbringing, especially amongst folks with broken homes and stuff, it's really not that uncommon to be honest. And it's terrible, but somebody listening in that situation or working with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
A brother, a sister, a coworker, whatever it is in that situation, what would you say to them?
Well, if you're in the situation, let me address the person that's not in the situation, praying for someone. I think you have to understand that God is working in people's lives, and there are steps that are being taken. There's a journey, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to use it as a cliche. There really is. And so you're working with someone, you're testifying to, and you're being a witness. Don't try to force the situation, right? Because the more you push, the more they're going to push back. And I did that because, my family did it to me, and I pushed back. But at that moment when God is there, God is drawing, it's like, boom. I could have said no. I didn't want to say no to God. And so trying to force people, just accept the fact that you may just be step number 3 in a 10-step process.
Yeah.
Trust God.
Yeah.
And let him work on them. And if you're the one in that situation, I mean, you need to listen and be sensitive to the voices of God, the voice of God that's speaking to you. and drawing you into himself. And generally, there's a consciousness that we have, and God speaks to that consciousness. And I think, okay, this is me, this is my experience, but for me, I knew when it was God. Because what I was being told to do was definitely not the stuff I wanted to do. Right? I mean, put this down, don't do that, don't go here, don't do that,
Yeah,
that kind
right,
of thing.
yeah.
I knew it, but I just pushed it aside. So if you're there, if you really, look, the way of evil is going to come home to roost, whether it's in this life or the next. It could be both. It's going to come home to roost. And so every single one of us will stand before God and give an account, whether you're raised in a good home, a bad home, whether you're raised in a religious home or a non-religious home. We are all going to give an account, period.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back and talk a little bit more, because there's a whole lot more to the story, and you're only like 19, 20 by this time.
Yeah.
And so there's
Yes.
a lot more going on, a lot of stuff there. But we'll end it there. And yeah, thanks so much for coming and sharing this. We're really praying that this will go out and help a lot of people.
Absolutely.
All right.
Jesus' name.